Let's talk about affordable housing again. Now, it's one of those phrases we hear all the time from politicians to developers and even banks. But then, if we're being honest, it's one of the most misunderstood ideas in Ghana's real estate space. Because we hear affordable housing and then most people think of cheap houses. But then that's not what affordability means. True affordability is not about how cheap a house is, it's about how possible it is for an ordinary Ghanaian to pay for it comfortably through a fair and accessible system. And that's where Ghana's problem begins. My name is Desmond Kafui, and you're welcome to another episode of Ghana Ground Up. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room. Real estate is very expensive. In fact, very, very expensive. Buying a property will often be one of the most expensive things you'll ever do, and we all know that land is not cheap. Building materials are not cheap, and the prices are going up all the time. Furnishing a house is not cheap either. And in fact, anything and everything about having your own place is very expensive. Now, in Ghana, and even generally, we often interpret affordable as cheap. But then think about it. What's the point in calling a 700,000 city apartment affordable if the average Ghanaian cannot qualify to buy it? And this is not just some arbitrary price. This is actually the selling price of a two-bedroom apartment in a project that is tagged affordable. I mean, definitely the price doesn't match the general expectations. Now, according to the Bank of Ghana, a housing deficit is estimated around 2 million housing units, which means that there are about 2 million families in Ghana that need a place to call home, but then they don't have it yet. So, I mean, forget about the big grammar about housing deficit and all that. That is basically what it means. Regardless of this issue, most new developments are targeted at the upper income class. And we can't blame property developers for focusing on the part of the market that will definitely give them their profits. You'd see that developers are not running some form of humanitarian organization that aim to provide shelters for the population. They're in business, and it's as simple as that. It's strictly business. Now, the only thing that will make more developers build less expensive houses will be if there are incentives that are attractive enough for them to even engage the space in the first place. So you see that the people who actually need homes the most, that is the middle class and also the lower income earners, are often left out of the market almost completely. Now, this is because the real issue is not just about the cost of housing. It's a lack of a financing system that allows people to buy houses over time. Let's face it, in Ghana, most people buy houses with cash. And you'd see that mortgage, I mean, generally sounds nice in theory, but then in practice, very few people end up qualifying to get one. And according to the Bank of Ghana, mortgage penetration in Ghana is less than 1% of the GDP, which means that only a few people are actually buying properties through structured finance. And why is this so? Well, there are two situations here. Number one, a good number of Ghanaians work in the formal sector, but then really their earnings and their cost of living ends up making them fall short of qualifying for a mortgage. And secondly, most Ghanaians work in the informal sector. And there are really no pay slips or consistent documentation of their cash flow and their earnings. Even if you're able to beat the odds and then you end up qualifying for a mortgage, the interest rates can range between 23% to 30% per year. And this makes monthly mortgage repayments completely unrealistic for most Ghanaians. Now, if you're buying a house for, let's say, 700,000 Ghana cedis, the apartment I mentioned earlier, and then you need to pay 30% upfront. That is 210,000 Ghana cedis cash just to start. And for most people, I mean, it's impossible. I mean, 210,000 Ghana cedis. So what happens? Well, people save for years, they buy land, and then they'll end up building in increments, like small, because really that's the only system that works for them. And it's not because they don't want mortgages, no, but then because the system doesn't support them. There's no room for them. So they have to work out their own ways at their own pace. The Bank of Ghana's report on Ghana's real estate sector makes a clear point that the biggest challenge we're facing is financing. So you'd see a case where developers face very high land prices, there are high cost of importing materials, and infrastructure is generally expensive. And all of this put together end up driving prices of properties up. But even worse, property buyers don't have access to low interest long-term loans. So you'd see that demand and supply are speaking two different languages. Developers are building for the few who can pay cash, while the majority are locked out because, they'll need to save up for a very long time to be able to pay cash. And they can't access loans that will even soften the punch for them. This is why so many so-called affordable housing projects fail, not because the buildings are not good, but because the buyers don't have access to a working payment system. True affordable housing is not about building the cheapest possible structures. Even if there were cheap houses, cheap would be relative because regardless of the pricing, there will still be many that won't be able to afford it. Now, true affordability is about creating systems that allow people to buy standard, decent homes without breaking their backs. That means affordable financing, which provides lower interest rates, smaller down payments, and also longer repayment periods. True affordability means creating alternative credit systems so that the informal sector workers can qualify based on their consistent incomes and not some payslips which they don't even have in the first place. True affordability also means partnerships between the public sector and the private sector, where the government supports developers with land, infrastructure, and financing incentives. Now, this is already at play, but then this is not enough to drastically drive down the price of properties for majority of Ghanaians. True affordability also means producing materials locally to reduce the high cost of importation, which can stabilize prices. But unfortunately, in Ghana, the case is sometimes that locally produced materials end up costing way more than imported ones. And that's why you'd see many developers preferring to source their materials abroad. Now, our local quality is very good, but then the pricing often becomes the weak link. Now, the Bank of Ghana actually calls for a creation of sustainable housing finance frameworks that involves banks, pension funds, and long-term capital sources to make true affordability possible. But it's not just about the system. We also have a mindset problem that is from both developers and buyers. Now, to some developers, they interpret affordability to mean cutting corners on projects, but then really, I believe quality and affordability can coexist with smart design and efficient construction. Now, on the flip side, property buyers need to rethink their relationship with credit in the sense that we need to think of mortgages not as traps, because when they are done properly, they become tools for you to build wealth over time. Now, the terms of a mortgage are often very unforgiving. So when you slip up, you can really take a very heavy fall. So many people end up seeing mortgages as traps, but then you need a lot of information to get it right. So a mortgage can be a good thing, but then is not for everyone. So you see that these structures work in countries where the middle class thrives, not because houses are cheap, but then because there are systems that make home ownership manageable. So what's the way forward for Ghana? Well, we need to stop measuring affordable housing by the selling price and start measuring it by accessibility. We need better coordination between the governments, between developers, and also financial institutions. We need to design a housing system that serves the real market and not just something that will look good in the news headlines. And we also need good financing systems that make decent housing possible for everyone and not just the top earners. Because until we fix this, we'll keep building projects called affordable housing that the average Ghanaian still cannot afford. Affordable housing is really not about cost. It's about access. And it's not about cheap materials or smaller spaces. It's about whether the ordinary Ghanaian can walk into a bank and actually qualify to buy a decent home. And until we build a system that makes this possible, affordability will remain a dream that is sold to the public instead of being a reality they can live in. If you found this episode useful, definitely do well to like, do well to share, and of course, subscribe to the channel because we have more and we have better coming up. I'm Desmond Kafui, and this is Ghana Ground Up. I'll catch you in the next episode.